The knife pressed against Noemi Ravenscroft's throat was cold, but not as cold as the hand that swept it away. She had not screamed. Everyone in the Velvet Thorn had gone utterly silent the moment Balthazar Vandrak rose from his chair, and the sound of the vampire courier's wrist snapping was somehow quieter than the absence of breath in the room. Noemi stood behind the bar, her tray still perfectly level in her hand, her dark eyes fixed on the scene unfolding 6 feet in front of her, with a steadiness that had made people call her either brave or foolish for years. She had decided long ago that the distinction did not much matter. "You touched what belongs to the heir's table," Balthazar said. His voice was not loud, it did not need to be. It moved through the air the way winter moves through old stone walls, inevitable and total. He held the courier by the broken wrist, examining him with pale silver eyes that carried about as much warmth as the surface of a frozen lake. "You also touched her." The courier, a vampire from one of the lesser Meridian courts, was trying very hard not to cry out. His name was Dorvek, and Noemi had served him 3 glasses of synthetic crimson in the last hour without incident. She had no idea what had changed, what signal she had missed, what political wire she had accidentally stepped on by simply walking past his table with someone else's order. She only knew that when his arm had shot out and grabbed her collar, and he'd pressed that blade to her throat, every human employee in the bar had gone rigid with the particular terror of people who understand, bone deep, that they are the least protected creatures in the room. She had not gone rigid. She had looked at the blade and calculated angles. "Let him go," she said now, because the courier's face had gone the particular grey-violet of a vampire about to lose consciousness from pain, and she was not interested in watching a man die on the floor of her workplace, regardless of what he had done. Balthazar turned his head, just slightly, just enough to look at her. She had served him 4 times in the 2 weeks since the Vandrak heir had taken up residence in the private upper booth at the Velvet Thorn. She had brought him blood wine in crystal, so thin it was almost dishonest about being a container, and she had not flinched when he watched her pour it, and she had not simpered or made herself small, and he had tipped exactly what the service deserved and not a coin more. She had respected that. She respected precision. "He had a blade at your throat," Balthazar said, and the evenness of his voice made the sentence feel like something carved in granite. "And now he does not. Let him go. I am asking you nicely." She set the tray down on the bar. "I will only do it the one time." Something shifted in Balthazar Vandrak's silver eyes, something old and deeply interested. He dropped the courier. Dorvik hit the floor, cradled his ruined wrist, and did not look up at either of them. Balthazar straightened his jacket. It was a black so deep it seemed to absorb light, and his white hair fell across one shoulder in a thick braid that made him look simultaneously like the subject of a Renaissance painting and the most dangerous individual in any given room. He looked at Noemi. She looked back. "You should leave the city," he said, "before anyone tries that again." "This is my city," she said. "I was born here. So was the empire that built the catacombs beneath it. Things still leave." "Not me," she said, and picked up her tray, and went back to work. She was aware for the rest of that shift that he watched her. Not in the way the drunk businessman sometimes did, the kind of watching that made her feel like inventory. It was more like the way a scholar watches something they are trying to understand. Like she was a text in an unfamiliar language. She had heard about Balthazar Vandrak the way everyone in Karath City had heard about him. In fragments, in warnings, in the particular hush that fell over a room when his name came up between people who did not know who might be listening. He was the heir to the Vandrak bloodline, one of the 4 ancient courts that had shaped this city's invisible architecture for 3 centuries. His father, Aldrich Vandrak, held a seat on the Crimson Conclave, the secret body of elder vampires that made decisions the human government merely ratified without knowing it. Balthazar was next in line for that seat, and the word was that he was both more ruthless and more principled than his father, which was either reassuring or terrifying depending on which side of a blood law you happened to be standing on, everyone warned her. Marco, the bar manager, had pulled her aside on the second night and told her with real fear in his eyes that she needed to be careful. He said the heir's attention was not a thing humans survived well, that his court's expectations for human staff at establishments he frequented involved either civility or invisibility, and she was demonstrably committed to neither. Her friend Dasha, who worked the coat check and had been in Kareth City's underground social world since before Noemi arrived 3 years ago, had taken her by both hands in the staff bathroom and said, "Please, Noemi, please just be invisible. Please just do not engage. Please do not look him in the eye." And Noemi had listened carefully to all of it and then gone back out and delivered his order with the same direct level competence she delivered everyone's. She was 24 years old, and she had been navigating spaces where she was not entirely welcome since she was old enough to understand that being unwelcome was not the same as being wrong to be there. The night Dorvek put the knife to her throat was a Thursday. On Friday, there were flowers on the bar, no card. White roses the color of old ivory, with thorns so fine they looked like calligraphy. Marco looked at them, and looked at Noemi, and looked at the private upper booth, and said absolutely nothing, which was its own kind of message. Noemi put the flowers in the staff room where they would actually be appreciated, and went upstairs to take Balthazar Vandrak's order. He was alone tonight, which was unusual. He was normally accompanied by 2 members of his court, a tall, angular woman named Serevka, who wore weapons openly, and a quieter male vampire called Ossian, who watched rooms the way architects watch buildings, always assessing structure. Tonight the booth held only Balthazar, and he was reading something on a tablet that he put face down when she arrived, with the ease of someone accustomed to having interesting things they do not choose to share. "The flowers," she said, setting down the complimentary blood wine and pulling out her order pad. "Were they from you?" "They were a gesture of recognition," he said. "Recognition of what?" "Of the fact that you are the first person in 6 months to ask me to show mercy to someone who had just tried to harm you." He picked up the glass and examined her with the critical eye of someone for whom quality was not negotiable. "Everyone else who witnesses violence in my presence either looks away or looks pleased." Noemi wrote nothing on the order pad. "What else can I get you tonight?" The corner of his mouth moved. She would not have called it a smile exactly, more like the acknowledgement that a smile was somewhere in the vicinity. "Sit with me," he said. "I am working. Marco will not object. Marco's opinion of what I do with my time is not the relevant variable. I object." She clicked her pen. "What else can I get you?" He looked at her for a long moment. The silver of his eyes in low light was extraordinary, she thought, not beautiful in a comfortable way. Beautiful in the way the edge of something very sharp is beautiful, all precision and potential. "Nothing else," he said. "Thank you, Noemi." She walked back downstairs, with her spine straight and her heartbeat only slightly faster than usual, which she counted as a personal victory. He came back the following week and the week after. He always sat in the upper booth. He always came alone. He began requesting her by name when she was not the one who met him at the stairs, and Marco, whose survival instincts were honed to a fine point after 15 years running a vampire-adjacent establishment, always sent her up without comment. The first time they actually talked, really talked, was 3 weeks after the knife incident. When she came up with his order and found him staring at the window with an expression that was not the composed remoteness she was used to. It was something older and more tired. She set the glass down and said nothing and was about to leave when he spoke. "My father has arranged a blood pact with the Moraville court," he said, without consulting me. She did not know what a blood pact was in specific terms, but she knew enough about the old world codes to understand that pacts between courts were binding in ways that made legal contracts look like friendly suggestions. "Is that bad?" she asked. "The Moraville court has been trying to absorb the Vandrak bloodline for 200 years, he said. "A blood pact is an ancient vow. Traditionally, it involves a binding union." His eyes came away from the window and found hers. "A marriage. They are arranging your marriage." "They have arranged it. There is a difference." He said it without visible anger, which was somehow worse than anger. It was the tone of someone who has already processed their fury and arrived at the cold clarity on the other side. "The Conclave will ratify it at the next assembly, 3 weeks from now." Noemi sat down across from him. She had not been invited, but she sat down anyway because he was clearly in distress, even if distress on a several centuries-old vampire looked like polished granite under pressure. "Who is she?" "Her name is Verantia Moraville. She is 400 years old and has wanted the Vandrak estate since before my father built it. She is calculating, she is patient, and she has been playing the long game of this acquisition for longer than anyone in my bloodline has been paying attention. He looked at his glass. She will dismantle everything my family built. Not violently. She is too intelligent for violence. She will do it through the letter of the pact, through the blood law, through every legal mechanism the Conclave recognizes, and she will do it with the smile of someone being entirely reasonable. Can you refuse the pact? An heir who breaks an ancient vow dishonors his bloodline. The Conclave could strip the Vandrak seat. So the choice is marry someone who will destroy your family or lose your family's power protecting them from her. He looked at her with that same studying expression. You understood that very quickly. It is not complicated, it is just terrible. She folded her hands on the table. Is there any other option?
There is one,
he said. But it involves a counterclaim under the Old World Code, and it requires something the Vandrak court has not held for a century. What? He was quiet for a moment. A human under formal protection, a named ward. The old code stipulates that a court with a named human ward cannot be compelled into a cross-court pact without that ward's consent, because the pact would bind the ward by extension, and the code forbids binding an unwilling human to vampire law. He paused. It is an ancient loophole. Verantia Moraville knows it exists. She will have counted on the Vandrak court having no human wards and therefore no recourse. Noemi was very still. You are not about to ask me what I think you are about to ask me. I am going to ask you, he said, what it would take to make you say yes. She stared at him. The candlelight in the booth was warm amber, and it did nothing to soften the impossible precision of his face, the carved quality of his jaw, the way his white hair caught light like something that had been designed to. He was watching her with complete seriousness, and she understood suddenly that he had been building toward this conversation for 3 weeks, that every visit had been an assessment, that he had chosen her with the deliberateness that characterized everything he apparently did. You do not even know me, she said. I know that you did not flinch when a vampire put a blade to your throat. I know that you asked me to show mercy to the man who attacked you. I know that you refused to sit down until you decided to sit down, and that you have been thinking about every word I said since I started talking, and you have not been frightened. He leaned forward very slightly. In my experience, Noemi, that combination is extraordinarily rare. It is not a compliment if it ends with you asking me to serve as a political shield. I know that, and if you say no, I will not ask again, and I will find another way, or there will not be another way. I am not bargaining with you, I am asking. His voice dropped to something quieter, something that felt uncomfortably genuine. I am asking because you are the only person in this city who has treated me like someone whose word means something. Most people in my world are afraid of me. Most people outside my world are afraid of what I represent. You are neither, and that is either a gift or a character flaw. I cannot determine yet. Noemi was quiet for a long moment. Outside, Kareth City went on its regular nocturnal business. 8 million people moving through streets that ran above and below the older, darker architecture of the vampire courts. She had come to this city at 21 with 2 bags and a scholarship to the Institute of Historical Studies, and the scholarship had run out, but the city had kept her, and she had built her life here brick by brick in the practical, stubborn way she built most things. Tell me everything, she said, all of it. What the ward status actually means legally, what it would require of me, what the risks are, what you can and cannot protect me from, and why you genuinely believe this would work instead of simply making me a target. Something in his posture changed, not a relaxation exactly, more a recalibration, like a very precise machine recognizing that it was finally working with the correct input. All right, he said. All right, I will tell you everything. He talked for 2 hours. She listened, asked questions that were sharp and specific, asked them again when the answers were incomplete, and pushed back twice when she thought he was minimizing risk. He did not dismiss her questions. He answered them with the same precision she had given to serving his drinks, and when she caught him in an understatement, he acknowledged it without defensiveness. By the end of it, she had a clearer picture of vampire court politics than most humans ever acquired in a lifetime adjacent to it. The ward arrangement, formally, meant she would be publicly claimed as under Vandrak protection, recorded in the Conclave's registry, and granted a medallion of bloodline marking that would make her legally untouchable by any other court. It would last until she formally released the arrangement, or until the political necessity passed. She would have to appear at the Conclave assembly. She would have to stand in the same room as Varantia Moravel and every elder vampire in the city, and not visibly wilt. "What happens to me if this goes wrong?" she asked. "Define wrong. If the Conclave rejects the counterclaim. If Moravel finds a way around the loophole. If your father overrides you. If the Conclave rejects it, the ward arrangement dissolves and you return to your life. Moravel has no grievance with you personally if the counterclaim fails on procedural grounds." He paused. "If my father overrides me, that is a different matter. He may view the arrangement as a provocation. Will he?" "Almost certainly." He met her gaze. "I will not lie to you about what my father is. He is not a kind man. He is a powerful one, and he believes power justifies its own methods. He arranged this pact without consulting me, because he believes his authority over my future is absolute." "And is it?" The silver of his eyes went very still. "Not if I have something to say about it." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I want a contract. Written in both the old court language and English. I want every term specified. I want an exit clause with clear conditions. And I want it reviewed by someone whose loyalty is not to you. I can arrange all of that." "Then I will think about it," she said. "I want 3 days." He nodded once with a gravity that told her the 3 days would be honored exactly. She stood to leave. He said her name, and she paused. "Thank you," he said, "for listening." The Velvet Thorn closed at 4 in the morning, and Noemi walked home through streets still damp from an earlier rain, thinking about blood laws and ancient vows, and the way Balthazar Vandrak's voice had dropped, just slightly, when he talked about his father's expectations for his future. She thought about the exhaustion in it. She had heard that kind of exhaustion before. Not the tired of someone who needed sleep. The tired of someone who had been fighting a long war in a very small space. She spent her 3 days reading. She had access to the Institute's library still, a courtesy extended to former scholarship holders, and the Institute's collection on vampire court law was quietly extraordinary, because the Institute's funding came from sources the administration preferred not to examine too closely. She read about the blood law, about the ward system, about the historical use of human wards as political instruments, and also about the history of the Vandrak court itself. What she found about Balthazar specifically was mostly rumor, mostly fragmentary, mostly the kind of second-hand account that got written by people who had seen him in formal settings and focused entirely on the impression of controlled danger he projected. One account, however, an old city recorder's log from 8 years ago, noted that Balthazar Vandrak had personally intervened to remove a corrupt conclave official who had been running a human trafficking operation on the city's east side. He had not done it through official channels. He had simply made the situation stop, and the official had retired to somewhere outside the city, and the operation had never restarted. Noemi read that 3 times. On the 3rd day, she went to Dasha, who she trusted more than anyone in the city, and told her everything. Dasha sat across from her at their kitchen table and held a cup of tea in both hands, and listened to all of it without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously, because Dasha's resting state was interrupting. "He wants you to be his ward," Dasha said when Noemi finished. "He wants me to be the counterclaim." "Yes, Noemi. You are aware that the Moravel court is not going to sit quietly while someone uses a legal loophole to blow up their acquisition strategy." "I am aware. And you are aware that you are a human woman with a bar tray and a library card and no supernatural anything standing in the middle of a 400-year-old vampire power struggle." "I am aware of that too, and you are still considering it." He told me the truth, all of it. When I pushed back, he answered me. When I caught him minimizing the risk, he acknowledged it. She wrapped her hands around her own cup. "In my experience, that is actually quite rare." Dasha looked at her for a long moment. "You like him. I do not know him well enough to like him. I think he may be worth knowing. That is not a denial. That is the most honest answer I have." Dasha sighed the deep, comprehensive sigh of someone who has decided to support a decision they think is at least 40% catastrophic. All right, tell me everything about this exit clause. Noemi sent word to the Velvet Thorn, and by the following morning a message had been returned by a courier who appeared to be a different and significantly less threatening variety of vampire than Dorvek. The meeting was set. She met Balthazar at his city residence, which was not the sort of place she had expected. She had expected somewhere aggressively Gothic, all stone and shadows, but the address he gave her was a high-rise apartment in the financial district, where the windows went floor to ceiling, and the furniture was clean-lined and expensive, and the only Gothic note was the archive room, which she glimpsed through an open door, and which appeared to contain approximately 3 centuries of actual history stored in a way that told her whoever organized it had a very specific and personal relationship with the concept of permanence. His solicitor was a vampire named Lysara, who was about as warm as a mathematical theorem, and who clearly thought the whole arrangement was legally interesting and personally perplexing. She reviewed the contract with Noemi point by point, and Noemi asked questions until she was satisfied, and Lysara raised one arched brow at her twice, which Noemi chose to interpret as a form of professional respect. She signed. The ward medallion was a disc of pale metal on a chain, engraved with the Vandrak court seal, and when Balthazar fastened it around her neck, he was very careful not to touch her skin, and she found herself inexplicably aware of the fact that he was being careful. "The conclave assembly is in 18 days, he said. "Between now and then you will need to be visible." "Visible how?" "Seen with me, in places where the right people will take note." He stepped back to a respectful distance. "I want to be clear about something. The visibility is political necessity. Any time you spend with me is entirely under your control. If at any point you wish to step back from the arrangement, the exit clause is real, and I will not obstruct it." "I know," she said. "I read it 4 times. This time his mouth did the thing that was close to a smile and went a little further. "Of course you did." The 18 days were not what she expected. She had expected cold political maneuvering, formal appearances, the performance of proximity without actual connection. She had expected to feel like a chess piece. Instead, she found herself in Balthazar Vandrak's company, with a frequency that felt less calculated and more like something neither of them had entirely planned for. He took her to the Nocturne Gallery, a private art museum that opened only after dark, and whose collection included work commissioned by the old courts over 3 centuries. He showed her a portrait of his grandmother, painted in 1847, and said she had been the first Vandrak to challenge a conclave ruling openly and survive it. He said it with something in his voice that was not quite pride but lived in the same territory. She told him about her own grandmother, who had taught herself 4 languages by 60 and had told Noemi that the only thing that genuinely separated the people who accomplished things from the people who did not was the willingness to be in the room when it was uncomfortable. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She sounds like someone worth knowing." "She was," Noemi said. "She died 2 years ago. She was the reason I stayed in school as long as I did." They were standing in front of a painting of a winter landscape, all silver and shadow, and the silence between them was not empty. It was full of something neither of them named. They went to the conclave's pre-assembly reception, which was held in a subterranean hall beneath the city's oldest cathedral, a space that managed to be simultaneously magnificent and deeply unnerving. Every elder vampire in Karath City was present, along with their retinues and their politics and their centuries of accumulated grudges. Noemi wore a dark grey dress and the Vandrak medallion, and she stood beside Balthazar, and she did not flinch. Varantia Moravel found them in the 3rd hour. She was exactly what Balthazar had described, and also something else that description alone could not convey. 400 years of intelligence had refined itself in her face into something that looked like elegance and functioned like a weapon. Her hair was white silver and pinned in elaborate coils, and her eyes were the dark amber of old honey, and the smile she gave Noemi was the specific smile of someone who is calculating you while pretending to appreciate you. "The human ward," she said, and the words were perfectly pleasant. How unusual for the Vandrak court. "Balthazar, your father has not taken a ward in 60 years. My father and I have different approaches," Balthazar said. His tone was courteous and about as yielding as the stone walls around them, Varantia's amber eyes moved to Noemi with the focused quality of a lens. "You are very young," she said, "and this is a very old world you have stepped into." "I am aware," Noemi said. "I did my research." "Research." Varantia repeated the word gently, the way one might repeat a child's explanation of a complex thing. "How admirable. And did your research tell you that ward arrangements have historically ended in ways that were not always comfortable for the ward?" "It told me about those cases," Noemi said. "It also told me about the blood law provisions that prevent interference with a named ward under court protection, which applies specifically to me, now, under the terms of the Vandrak medallion. So if you are suggesting that my situation is precarious, you are technically incorrect. If you are trying to frighten me into abandoning the arrangement, I would save the effort. I am rather difficult to frighten." Varantia Moravel looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Balthazar, then she smiled, and this smile was different from the first one, less calculated, almost genuine, almost like something she had not expected to feel. "Interesting choice," she said, and moved away into the crowd. Balthazar said nothing for a moment. Then very quietly he said, "That was remarkable, La. She was trying to intimidate me. It would have worked better if she had not telegraphed it. Most people do not notice the telegraph. Most people are too focused on the intimidation." Noemi took a breath. "She is not finished. That was a test." "Yes," he agreed. "She is deciding whether you are a variable she needs to neutralize or simply remove." The word remove sat between them with considerable weight. "I am not going to be neutralized or removed," Noemi said. "For the record, I know," he said, and something in the way he said it made her turn to look at him, and his silver eyes were on her face with an expression she had not seen on him before. Something unguarded and very direct. "Balthazar," she said, because she had stopped thinking of him as the heir somewhere in the middle of the gallery visit, and the change in how she addressed him had happened without either of them making a decision about it. "Yes. If things go wrong at the assembly, what is your actual plan? Not the legal framework, the actual contingency." He was quiet for a moment. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said. "That is not a legal framework. That is a fact." She believed him. That was the alarming part. She looked at a man who had been alive for longer than her country had existed, who held more power in this room than the human mayor of their city held in all of it, and she believed him in the simple, bone-level way you believe things that you can feel are true before you can articulate why. Aldrich Vandrak found them before the reception ended. He was older looking than his son, not in a physical sense, all vampires read as ageless, but in the specific way that someone who has held power for a very long time develops a particular weight to their presence. His hair was white as Balthazar's, but kept shorter, and his eyes were the color of old silver, the same gene made somehow more opaque. He looked at Noemi the way someone looks at a complication they were not expecting. "So," he said. "The ward." "Father," Balthazar said, "there was a warning in it." "I have reviewed the arrangement," Aldrich said, to Noemi and not to his son. "It is legally sound. It is also an act of provocation against an agreement I made in good faith on behalf of this family." His voice was not loud either. The Vandrak men both had that quality, voices that did not need volume. "The agreement you made on behalf of this family was made without the family's knowledge," Balthazar said, "or its consent. You are my heir. Your consent is a courtesy, not a requirement. I understand that you believe that." Balthazar's voice was perfectly level. "I do not." Aldrich's eyes moved back to Noemi. They were not warm. They were the eyes of a man doing math. "This will not end the way you think it will, young woman." "Which ending do you mean?" she asked. "The political one or the personal one? Because I have done the research on both and I am prepared for quite a few scenarios." Aldrich looked at her for a moment that stretched considerably. Then he said to Balthazar, "She is brave or she is reckless." "She is neither," Balthazar said. "She is prepared. There is a distinction." Aldrich turned and left without another word, the night before the conclave assembly. Balthazar's city residence was broken into. Noemi was not there. She was home, rereading the contract for what felt like the 12th time, but was probably the 7th when her phone rang. It was Serevka, the angular woman from his court, and her voice was clipped and had a quality to it that cut through Noemi's tired like cold water. "Someone went through the heir's archive room," she said. "Nothing taken. But the ward registry paperwork was accessed, We believe a copy was made. Who? Moravel's people. The security caught the signature and lost the individual. A pause. The Heir is fine. He is asking that you come. He says you do not have to. Noemi was already putting her shoes on when she arrived. The archive room had been sealed, and Balthazar was in the living area with Serevka and Ossian, and an expression that was doing a great deal of controlled work to stay composed. He looked up when she came in, and the control slipped, just slightly, and she saw something real and alarmed underneath it. You came, he said. You asked. Tell me what they took. The ward registry had her full name, her home address, her employment history, and a legal transcript of the arrangement, including the exit clause conditions. Moravel had the paperwork now, which meant she had Noemi's vulnerabilities mapped in the same way a general maps terrain before an offensive. She cannot void the ward while the assembly has not yet ruled, Ossian said. Procedurally, Noemi is protected until the conclave either validates or invalidates the counterclaim. She will not wait for the assembly, Serevka said flatly. She will move before. Noemi sat down on the edge of the sofa and thought. The others were talking around her, and she let them, because the fastest way to think was not to narrate the thinking. She turned the information over, looking at it from different angles, asking what Varantia Moravel actually needed. She needed the ward arrangement gone. She could not do that through the official channels before the assembly, so she would do it through unofficial ones. She needed Noemi to break the arrangement voluntarily, or to be removed from it physically, or to have the paperwork declared fraudulent. The archive break-in suggested she had gone for the paperwork angle, which meant she was looking for a fraudulent claim, a pretext. She is going to claim I was coerced, Noemi said. Everyone stopped talking. If she has the paperwork and has looked at the circumstances, she knows he signed the arrangement while employed at an establishment the Vandrak court frequents, and while the Heir was a regular patron. She can argue that the power imbalance constitutes coercion. She can bring that to the conclave before the assembly and ask for an emergency hearing. Noemi looked at Balthazar. That is what she is building. Balthazar sat down across from her. How do we counter that? We get there first. We request the emergency hearing ourselves, voluntary, which removes her ability to define the framing. We present the contract, Lysara as witness to the signing, the exit clause on its full terms, and my direct testimony that I made an informed choice as an independent party. She paused. And we do it tomorrow morning. Before she files. Serevka and Ossian looked at each other. That could work, Ossian said carefully. That would definitely work, Serevka said, and sounded grudgingly impressed. Balthazar was looking at Noemi with the full, focused attention she had come to recognize as the highest form of regard he expressed. You work that out in 3 minutes, he said. 2.5, she said. I had a head start on understanding Moravel's strategy. You stayed calm. I do not find panic useful. She met his gaze. Are you all right? You looked alarmed when I came in. The question caught him visibly off guard. She watched him recalibrate. Someone was in my archive rooms, he said. That is not what I asked. A pause, a long one. I was concerned for you, he said. When Serevka told me the paperwork had been accessed, your address. She held his gaze steadily. I am fine, I know, I can see that. It does not entirely resolve the concern. The room had gone quiet in a way that felt like Serevka and Ossian were both suddenly very interested in a different wall. Noemi did not look away from Balthazar. File the emergency hearing request tonight, she said. First thing tomorrow. We go, he nodded. And then so quietly, it was almost not said at all. Thank you for coming, you asked, she said again, as if that were the simplest thing in the world, and maybe it was. The emergency hearing was held in the conclave's lower chamber at 8 in the morning, which was not a time that favored vampires, and Noemi noted with some satisfaction that both Balthazar and Lysara were visibly managing this while being too controlled to show it properly. The chamber was a circular room of dark marble, with a long curved table at which 7 conclave members sat, including Aldrich Vandrak, who had been notified and who sat with the specific stillness of a man deciding which way to step. Varantia Moravel arrived 11 minutes into the session. She had not been told about the hearing. She had found out through her own networks, which spoke to how good those networks were, and she entered the chamber with the composed fury of someone who has had a strategy disrupted and is managing the disruption with extraordinary grace. She sat in the observers section, and she looked at Noemi, and Noemi looked back. Noemi testified for 22 minutes. She was precise, she was thorough, and when a conclave member named Velcor, an elder with iron-grey eyes and the bearing of someone who had been adjudicating these disputes since before most countries had existed, tried to suggest through the framing of his questions that she had been unduly influenced, she walked him calmly through the timeline of her decisions, the contract review process, the questions she had asked, and the research she had conducted independently. I made an informed choice as an adult individual with full knowledge of the legal implications, she said. The exit clause exists specifically because I requested it, which I would not have done if I had not understood that I had the authority to negotiate it. I was not coerced, I was consulted. Velcor studied her. You are very assured for someone in your position. My position is legally clear and personally sound, she said. Assurance seems appropriate. Velcor's expression shifted, and she would not have known how to read it on a human face. But on a vampire who had been holding the same expression for what looked like at least 3 centuries, a shift meant something. He looked at the paperwork again. He looked at Lysara's witness statement. He looked at Balthazar, who was standing with his hands clasped behind his back, and his face composed into the particular neutrality of someone who has done everything they can do and is now waiting. The ward arrangement is valid, Velcor said. Proceedings at the full assembly will stand. Varantia Moravel left the chamber without a word. Outside, in the corridor, Serevka allowed herself one very quiet sound of triumph. Ossian straightened his jacket. Balthazar turned to Noemi, and he was not composed anymore. He was something else, something open and bright, and very close to the way people look when a thing they had been afraid of stops being frightening. You were extraordinary, he said. I was accurate, she said, which is just a different kind of extraordinary. He laughed. She had not heard him laugh before. It was quiet and real, and it changed his face into something that was not the air of a vampire court, but simply a man who was relieved and delighted and standing in a marble corridor at 8:30 in the morning, feeling both of those things without trying to manage them into something more dignified. She thought, standing there, that she was in a great deal of trouble. The affectionate, kind Aldrich Vandrak found Balthazar before they reached the exit. He pulled his son aside into an alcove, and the conversation was brief and clearly not comfortable, and when Balthazar came back, his expression had closed somewhat. He is going to make a statement to the full assembly in support of the Moraville pact, he said. He will not directly contradict the ward arrangement, but he will use his seat to argue that the counterclaim, while legally valid, represents a disruption of established court relations. Will that work? He has more allies on the conclave than I do. A pause. But Velcor voted this morning in favor of the arrangement. Velcor is not given to impulse. If he found our argument compelling, others will too. So it is still possible. Yes, but the assembly will be contested. He looked at her. Noemi, after the assembly, regardless of the outcome, I want you to know that the exit clause will be honored, whatever you choose. She looked at him for a moment. You keep reminding me of the exit clause, because I want you to know it is real. I know it is real. You do not have to keep telling me about it unless you are hoping I will use it. Something in his expression moved through several things quickly. I am not hoping you will use it. Then stop reminding me of it, she said. Let me make my own choices without the disclaimers. He was quiet. Then he said very carefully, What are your choices? She looked up at him. In the low light of the corridor he was extraordinary and very close, and she was very aware of both things. I think, she said, that I am choosing to stand here, with you, at whatever the assembly brings. The full conclave assembly was 3 days later, and it was the most formally terrifying event Noemi had attended in her life, which was a category that now included 2 vampire court receptions and an emergency legal hearing, so the bar was not low. The conclave chamber was vast and ancient in a way that the lower rooms were not, stone carved with imagery that was probably allegorical and was certainly intense, and the full complement of conclave members filled the curved benches with enough accumulated power to make the air feel different. Balthazar presented the counterclaim formally. He was exceptional at it. The kind of speaker who has had several centuries to understand precisely how language works on different audiences. He acknowledged his father's pact with the Moraville court, affirmed its legitimacy as a diplomatic instrument, and then walked, point by careful point, through the blood law provision that required any cross-court pact to respect the autonomy of a court's named ward. He did not argue against the pact on personal grounds. He argued that the law was the law, and that the law had been designed with intent, and that the intent remained relevant. Verantia Moraville argued back, and she was remarkable at it. She had clearly prepared counter-arguments to every point, and she moved through them with the fluency of someone who had been doing this for 400 years and knew the law from the inside the way a builder knows a structure she helped construct. The debate ran for 2 hours. Balthazar Vandrak made his statement. It was carefully worded and legally correct, and it tried to frame the counterclaim as technically valid but diplomatically irresponsible. Several conclave members nodded. Noemi watched Velcor. Velcor did not nod. When the vote came, it was close. 5-4, 5-4 in favor of the ward counter-claim. The Moraville Pact was suspended pending renegotiation on terms that would require ward consent. Verantia Moraville did not look at Noemi when the ruling was announced. She looked at Balthazar, and then she looked at the floor, just briefly, in a way that might have been acknowledgement or might have been strategy. And then she was composed again, and moving toward the exit with the grace of someone who has played a long game and is already planning the next iteration. Balthazar Vandrak looked at his son. A long, complicated look. Then he said, so quietly that Noemi, 3 feet away, almost missed it, "Your mother would have done the same thing." He left without another word. Balthazar stood very still for a moment. Then he exhaled, and it was the exhale of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has been permitted to put it down. "It is over," Sarevka said. "The immediate part," Ossian said, practically. "The immediate part," Sarevka agreed, and looked at Noemi with an expression that was warm in the particular way that someone who rarely expresses warmth expresses it, through the absence of their usual coolness. Noemi looked at Balthazar. He looked at her. Around them the chamber was gradually filling with the sound of movement and conversation as the assembly dispersed, and it felt like the world starting up again after a pause. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "I believe the immediate political crisis is resolved. The ward arrangement remains in effect. Moraville will likely pursue a renegotiated pact that does not involve me, which is a different problem for a different day, and my father and I have a number of conversations that are long overdue." He paused. "And I would like to take you to dinner." She looked at him. "To dinner? Not for political visibility, not as a necessary appearance. To dinner? Because I would like to sit across from you at a table that does not have a crisis attached to it, and find out whether we talk as well when no one is trying to stop us." She felt it then, the full warmth of it, the thing she had been aware of building for weeks like a season turning. She thought about the gallery and the portrait of his grandmother, and the laugh in the marble corridor and the careful way he had not touched her skin when he fastened the medallion. And she thought about the fact that she had never once been afraid of him and how rare a thing that was. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I would like that." The dinner was at a restaurant on the upper level of the city. Above the underground courts and the old architecture, with windows that opened onto the skyline and made Carath City look like someone had built, out of light and intention. They ordered things they did not eat immediately because they were talking, and the conversation moved through history and small personal details and old arguments about subjects neither of them had expected to agree on, and occasional moments where both of them were quiet in a way that was entirely comfortable. He told her about the century he had spent traveling, not for pleasure, but because his father had sent him to each of the old courts to learn their politics, and how somewhere in the 3rd decade of that he had stopped being resentful of it and started being genuinely fascinated by the extraordinary persistence of human and vampire history alike, the way nothing truly ended, the way everything transformed. She told him about her parents, who were practical people in a small city far from Carath, who had been baffled by her ambitions, and Zand entirely supportive of them in the inarticulate way of people who do not understand a thing but love the person pursuing it. She told him about the scholarship running out and choosing to stay anyway, and he listened to that with a quality of attention that felt like being fully seen rather than simply heard. You stayed in a city where you had nothing guaranteed, he said. I had the city. That is not nothing. What did it feel like? The decision. Like the right thing, she said, which does not always feel good in the moment but tends to resolve correctly. He looked at her across the table. The light from the windows caught the silver of his eyes and made them luminous, and she thought again about precision and how he embodied it, how everything he did had that quality of considered intention. Can I tell you something? He said. Yes, I have spent the last 2 weeks trying to determine at what point I stopped thinking of you as the solution to a political problem. She held his gaze. When was it? The gallery. When you told me about your grandmother, and what she said about being in the room when it is uncomfortable. He paused us. I recognized it as something I had been trying to articulate about my own situation for years, and had not quite reached. Another pause. You gave me language for something I had been thinking wordlessly for a very long time. Noemi's chest was doing something complicated. She breathed through it. When I agreed to the ward arrangement, she said, I told myself I was doing it because the logic was sound and the terms were clear. Were you? Partially. She looked at the city lights. I was also doing it because I thought you were worth standing next to. She looked back at him. And I have been right about that in every situation since. He reached across the table, slowly, with the deliberateness that characterized everything he did, and put his hand over hers. His skin was cool, very slightly, the natural temperature of what he was, and she felt it, and did not move away, and when she looked up, he was watching her, with an expression that was stripped of everything, except what was true. You are the most remarkable person I have encountered in several centuries, he said. I am not being poetic, I am being precise. I know, she said. You are always precise. She turned her hand under his so that their fingers were interlaced. That is one of the things I like about you. His expression did something very beautiful and very human for someone who was neither young nor remotely human, and she thought she would remember this moment with the same clarity she remembered things that mattered, the sharp-edged memory of a significant choice made and recognized in the same instant. In the weeks that followed, she did not return to her old apartment. This had not been specifically decided, but the ward arrangement had an address associated with it that was technically the Vandrak residence, and she found herself spending evenings there that extended into staying. And Balthazar had shown her the archive room in its full and extraordinary measure, and she had spent an afternoon in it that felt like the most satisfying thing she had done since her best semester at the Institute. And when she looked up from a 300-year-old court document and found him standing in the doorway, watching her with that particular expression she had come to understand meant he was feeling something he was still learning to be easy with. She had simply said, I am going to need longer access to this room. You can have it, he said. You can have all of it. Whatever you want here is yours. The conversation about what she wanted here extended into something much larger and much more honest than she had expected for a Tuesday afternoon in an archive room. And it ended with both of them sitting on the floor between the shelves, because they had both forgotten they were not sitting down. And he had taken her face in his hands, with the same precision and care he applied to everything, and kissed her in a way that contained everything they had built in the past weeks. All the trust and the danger and the honesty and the stubborn mutual recognition, and she kissed him back with everything she had, which was considerable. Dasha, informed by phone that evening, made a sound that was approximately 40% joy and 60% vindicated. The political threads did not dissolve overnight. They never did. Varantia Moravil pursued a revised diplomatic agreement with the Vandrak court that did not involve a binding pact, and that was, by all accounts, actually more equitable than the original arrangement, which suggested that Varantia was, at her core, a pragmatist who was capable of recognizing when a strategy had run its course. She never directly addressed the assembly ruling or the ward arrangement. She moved forward, because 400 years had given her a very efficient relationship with the concept of forward. Aldrich Vandrak requested a private meeting with his son and Noemi together, which had the character of an encounter both parties were treating with considerable caution. They met in the elder Vandrak's residence, which was somewhere far older and more Gothic than Balthazar's city apartment. and which told her immediately that there were multiple ways of being a person even within the same bloodline. Aldrich was not warm. She did not expect him to be. He was measured and formal, and he looked at her across his study, with the silver eyes that were the same gene as Balthazar's, and said, "I made an assumption that I will acknowledge was premature. I assumed the ward arrangement was tactical and temporary. I am given to understand it has become something else." "Yes," Balthazar said. Aldrich looked at Noemi. "You understand what it means to be connected to this court long-term, the expectations, the politics, the blood law complexity of a human within a vampire bloodline in a formal capacity." "I understand the framework," she said. "I will keep researching the specifics as they arise. That is what I do." "You do not find that daunting?" "I find it interesting," she said. "There is a difference." Aldrich studied her with that mathematical quality she recognized from the first meeting, and she held his gaze and waited. "Balthazar," he said finally, without looking away from her, "she is quite something." "I know," Balthazar said. "The reference to your mother," Noemi said carefully. "At the assembly, what did you mean?" The question was direct and possibly too personal, and she asked it anyway because she had decided long ago that the direct path through something was preferable to the long way around. Aldrich was very still for a moment. "His mother," he said, "was the person who convinced me to challenge my own father's authority over the court's direction. She was human." He said the last two words with the quality of someone acknowledging something important for the first time in a long time. "She was also very hard to frighten. She understood more about the blood law than most of my court." He paused. "Balthazar did not do this the way I would have done it. He did it the way she would have." The room was very quiet. "I think," Noemi said, "that is probably a good thing." Aldrich looked at her for another long moment. Then something shifted in his face that was not warmth, not exactly, but was perhaps the outer edge of the territory where warmth might eventually be found. "Perhaps," he said. "Yes, perhaps it is." He did not oppose them. He did not become easy or uncomplicated or suddenly a different man than he had been for 3 centuries, but he did not oppose them, and from Balthazar Vandrak, that was its own kind of acknowledgement. The ward medallion stayed and around her neck long past the point where it was politically necessary, because she had stopped thinking of it as political. She thought of it as the object that had been present at the beginning of something real, and she valued that the way she valued the things that marked significant moments. Not sentimentally, but with the clear-eyed appreciation of someone who knows that some things are worth keeping. Balthazar asked her, on a night 6 months later when they were in the archive room, and she was deep in a research project that had started as curiosity about old court treaties and had evolved into what was beginning to look very much like an actual scholarly work, whether she was happy. She put down the document and looked at him. He was sitting across from her at the archive table with his own reading, and the lamp between them made everything warm and amber, and he was watching her with the expression that she had long since decoded entirely, the one that said he was feeling something he no longer had any need to manage or contain. "Yes," she said. "I am very happy." "More than I have been," he said, "in a very long time, possibly longer than I can accurately quantify." "Then we are both in good shape," she said, and went back to her document. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers briefly. The same gesture as the restaurant, the anchor of it, the deliberate choice of contact in a world where he was so careful about every choice, and she pressed back against his hand and felt the solid reality of where she was and who she was with, and thought that this, precisely this, was what staying like when you got it right. There was a conversation that happened on a winter morning when the city outside was grey and still, the kind of morning that made everything feel considered and important. Noemi had been thinking about the future in the practical way she thought about most things, not with anxiety, but with the honest curiosity of someone who likes to understand what she is walking into. The blood law, she had learned through extensive research, did have provisions for humans in long-term formal connection to vampire courts. The provisions were old and not commonly used in the modern era, but they were there, and they specified a process by which a human under court protection could apply for what the old code called the extended compact, a legal status that acknowledged the ongoing nature of the connection. and afforded the human significant protections and rights within the court framework, without requiring anything that went against the human's own nature or choices. It also addressed, in cautious and ancient language, the question of shared future, in terms that were legally careful and emotionally careful in equal measure. She brought the research to Balthazar on that grey winter morning, and put it on the archive table, and watched him read through it. He read it thoroughly, which she had come to expect, and when he finished he looked up at her with something in his eyes that was very quiet and very full. "You have been thinking about this," he said. "I research the things that matter to me," she said. "You know that. What are you asking me?" She sat down across from him. "I am not asking you anything yet. I am telling you what exists, what the options are. Because I think the most important things should be approached the way everything should be approached, with full information and the willingness to talk about the obvious things instead of going around them." He looked at the document. He looked at her. The extended compact would take several years to finalize through the conclave process, he said. "I know. It would require another formal hearing." "I know that too. I actually enjoy formal hearings at this point. I am very good at them." His expression moved into something that was completely unguarded and completely his, the specific light in his silver eyes that she associated with moments when he was too genuinely moved to manage it into something more composed. "Noemi," he said. "Balthazar," she said, "are you saying you want to stay?" "In the full, long-term sense of the word. I am saying that I have done the research on all the options, and this one is the one I want." She held his gaze with the steadiness that had always been her most distinctive quality, and that he had recognized before she had recognized what he was to her. "I am also saying that I am aware you have been wanting to have this conversation for a while, and have been waiting for me to be the one to start it, because you would not push me toward any choice, even one you hoped I would make, and I want you to know that I appreciate that enormously. And also that I would like you to tell me what you actually want, now that I have opened the door." He stood up. He came around the table, and he took her face in his hands, with that extraordinary care that meant something new every time it happened, the deliberateness of someone for whom touch was not a casual thing. "I want you here," he said. "I want the archive room arguments, and the formal hearings, and the dinners that go long, because we keep talking, and I want to introduce you to every court historian and dusty text I have ever valued, because you would understand them and have opinions about them. I want to be challenged by you, and to challenge you, and to watch you stand in rooms where everyone expects you to be small and to never once be small." He exhaled. "I want all of it. I want all of you. Whatever shape that takes, and whatever the conclave process requires, and whatever your terms are." She put her hands over his. "My terms are that we do it honestly, that we talk about the complicated things instead of around them, that you do not protect me from information even when you think the information would worry me, that we approach all of it the way we approach the counterclaim, together with full knowledge and the intention to make it work." "Those are my terms too," he said. "Then we are in agreement." She kissed him, and he kissed her back with everything he was, centuries of it, and all the present moment of it, and the future of it, and outside the city, hummed and moved and carried its ordinary and extraordinary life forward, and inside the archive room the lamp burned warm and steady between all the old documents that recorded other lives and other choices. Witnesses to the fact that this particular thing, this specific and stubborn and improbable connection between a human woman who did not know how to be frightened away, and a vampire who had been looking, without quite knowing it, for someone who would not be, was real and was good, and was exactly what both of them had chosen with full knowledge and full intention. The extended compact process did take 2 years. Noemi researched every step of it and argued 2 procedural points with conclave members who came to have a complicated and deeply respectful relationship with her level of preparation. Velthorn, the iron-grey conclave member who had voted in her favor on that first morning, became something approaching a colleague. He sent her texts. They were formal texts, written in the old court language, which she had spent 18 months learning to read adequately and was now learning to write, and they were about historical precedents and legal frameworks, and she valued them with the specific appreciation of a person who knows how rare it is to be taken seriously by someone who has had 3 centuries in which to become exacting about who deserves it. Aldrich Vandrak died in the 2nd year, which was not murder and was not politics, but was simply the thing that sometimes happens even to vampires who have held power for long enough. The quiet cessation of an ancient body that had finally finished. He died in his study in the old Gothic residence, and Balthazar sat with him. And when Balthazar came home afterward, he was quiet, in the way of someone carrying something heavy that he needed to carry for a while before he could put it down. Noemi sat with him in that quietness for a long time, and did not try to resolve it into something easier. Because she understood that the relationship between Balthazar and his father had been complicated in ways that were not simple grief and not simple relief, but something that contained both and many other things beside. And the only right response to that was presence. He talked about it, eventually, over several nights, in the way he talked about difficult things, carefully and honestly.
Yes.
And she listened the way she listened to everything he told her that mattered, with her full attention and without trying to make it fit a shape that was more comfortable than the actual shape of it. He was not kind, Balthazar said once, late in one of those nights. But he was not wrong about everything, and he loved my mother, I think, in his way. It was a compressed and impractical way, but it was real. People often love real things in impractical ways, she said. Is that us? She thought about the ward medallion and the emergency hearing and the gallery and the archive room and 2 years of conclave process and the fact that she was sitting with him in the dark on a night when he was grieving something that was not purely grief, and she thought, yes, it might be exactly that. Maybe, she said, but we make the impractical work. We are very good at that. He laughed softly and put his arm around her, and she leaned against his shoulder. And the night outside continued its own complicated and ongoing life, indifferent and magnificent and entirely unaware of being observed. The compact was finalized on a Thursday morning, the same day of the week as the knife at the bar, which Noemi noticed and found appropriately circular. The conclave ratified it by 6 votes to 3, which was more comfortable than she had allowed herself to expect, and Velchor's was the first vote, after outside the chamber, in the same corridor where Balthazar had laughed. For the first time in front of her, she looked at him, and he looked at her, and there was nothing they needed to perform for anyone in this moment. The political architecture was settled. The legal frameworks were in place. The complicated and ongoing life of the court and the city, and the world that ran both above and below the visible surface of things, would continue to be exactly as complicated as it had always been, because that was the nature of any world that contained history and politics and people, but this was done. This specific fight, this specific standing of ground, was done, and it had ended the way she had approached every important thing in her life, not by not being afraid, because she had been afraid on several specific occasions, and had made the choice to stay anyway, but by doing the research, saying the true thing, and refusing to be moved from the position she had chosen with full knowledge and full intent. She took his hand. He held it with the same precision and care he had held it the first time, as if a thing chosen deliberately was a thing worth treating accordingly. "Where would you like to go?" he asked. "Anywhere," she said. "I have no particular preference today. You choose." He looked at her with the silver eyes that she had long since stopped thinking of as extraordinary because they were simply his, simply part of the person who was as familiar to her now as her own voice. And he smiled the real smile, the full one, the one that had started as that small movement at the corner of his mouth on the first night she had refused to sit down until she decided to, and he said, "All right, I know a gallery." She laughed, and they walked out into the city, into the morning that belonged to everyone in Carath, who had somewhere to be and something to love, and the particular ordinary, extraordinary luck of being alive in it. And the city received them the way it received everything, without ceremony and without judgment, its 8 million lives flowing around them like water around a stone, not displacing them, not dissolving them, simply making room, as it had always made room for those who stayed, behind them. In the marble corridor, the quiet of the conclave chamber settled back into itself, Another ruling added to the archive of old decisions that shaped the architecture of a world most people moved through without seeing. And in the record, in the careful language of the old court code, the compact was noted and filed and made permanent, a small piece of history, marking the place where a human woman who had not flinched and a vampire heir who had chosen honesty over convenience had stood their ground, separately at first and then together, and had built something that would outlast the crisis that started it and become, in the fullness of time, simply the way things were. Which is all any love story is, in the end, the way things became. The way two people looked at what was possible and chose it, plainly and stubbornly and with their eyes open, and kept choosing it through everything that tried to make the choice more complicated than it was. She had stood her ground. He had stood with her, the rest was the life they built from that.